Daddy eats lots. Daddy eats lots. Daddy eats lots. Munch, munch, munch.
Hello and welcome to Daddy Eats Last, where we discuss the challenges of being a man in modern society and whatever the hell that even means. I'm Kane, and joining me to chat man stuff are Ryan and Matty. Firstly, gents, how was the weekend?
Very freaking cold.
Yes, it was cold down here in Melbourne. It was probably 27 degrees and balmy up in Brisbane where Matthew is, but it was cold down here in Melbourne.
Believe it or not, we've had some crazy weather the last few days. The wind has just been blowing for probably 3 days straight, which is typical this time of year when the Ekka show's on, but not as balmy as we'd like.
Now, what is the Ekka show, Matthew, for us southern folk?
Yeah, I don't know what Ekka means, but it's just the royal show they have here every year in Brisbane. So you could probably Google that or educate me on that, but it stands for something, no doubt. Yeah, August every year we get a public holiday for some reason thrown in the middle, which is a giant waste. Wednesday public holidays. We don't get Melbourne Cup, so yay.
Yeah, you haven't booked a trip away for this public holiday to leave Kim with the kids?
No, I'll do that at Christmas or something more important, you know.
What about you, Ryan? It was cold down here. You play hockey. Was it ice hockey this weekend, or was it just field hockey on a field of ice, or how did it look?
Pretty close too. It was very, very fresh, but no, we did play. And we had a wonderful 2-2 draw. So could have just not played and it would have been the same result, but that's okay. And the rest of the weekend's been pretty excitingly indoors, avoiding the cold. So can't complain.
Well, it's one of those weekends where it was, especially in Melbourne, it was nice to kind of, and all up and down the eastern seaboard. Of course, it snowed on Friday night in Canberra for the AFL. So I think it was just one of those those weekends in winter where it was just nice to do something inside. Our little fella had a little bit of a cold, or started getting a little bit of a cold yesterday. So our indoor day today, obviously being the weather and trying to keep him away from other people who spread the germs, was just him basically just reading books and watching television, which is kind of not ideal. But you know, when they can't actually do anything else, that's no different to when we're sick. But
good weekend to have indoors.
Yes, absolutely. Speaking of children and I guess adults as well, what we want to discuss tonight is education. And probably a good place to start is, I guess we're all going to give our opinions on education, but a good place to start is the level of education we've all received and whereabouts they were. Matthew, do you want to lead off?
Yeah, why not? Okay, so you want to throw primary school in there as well, or just kick off with high school?
I'll just kick off with as far as you went and where that was.
Okay. Yep, so year 7 to 12, I went to St Francis Xavier College in Beaconsfield, Victoria. That was a Catholic education, co-ed. Following that, I went to Chisholm Institute of TAFE for a business administration diploma for a couple of years, then straight to the workforce after that. I did enroll in a Bachelor of Commerce through Deakin and managed to punch out, I think, 8 or 10 subjects, but just found that it wasn't for me. So I was doing that, I think I mentioned that in the previous podcast, but I was doing that while I was working in an accounting firm, thinking that that was what I might like to do, but it turns out it was not.
I don't blame you being a card-carrying accountant. I guess I'll jump in at this point. I went to a public school called Heathmont Secondary College here in the eastern suburbs of Ringwood. Was there from obviously 7 to 12. It was just a standard high school. I do remember in about year 8 we were going to merge with a local tech school, and the tech school did woodwork and metalwork and all those sort of things, and we were more of a traditional high school, and we were going to go on strike. The students were going to go on strike for a couple of classes, and these days you'd probably organise it on social media. You'd probably get a couple of film crews down to film it or something like that. Basically, the principal caught wind of it and said, "Listen, anyone who just doesn't go to class is just going to get a detention." So, despite our, it's kind of how flimsy we were at our school with our political leanings, we were back in class by by half an hour later. So, and from there, I went to university, studied accountancy. And I've since done, just because you have to do these things, unfortunately, I've done my CPA, so I'm a certified practicing accountant, and that is where my formal education will in all likelihood end, because I don't think formal study is something which I'll do much of ever again. Mr. Ebert.
Yes. So I went to primary school in a place called Bligh Park, which is in the western suburbs, and then following that, a couple of years at Richmond High, which is a public high school out there in the western suburbs back in the late 90s, early 2000s. That was a very, we'll call it an up and coming area. And then headed over to Perth, did a year at a place called Kinross College, which finished at year 10, and then finished 11 and 12 at a place called Mindari College over in Western Australia there. Went on to the Australian Defence Force Academy for a year, where I did engineering for a year. And then left that, went to Curtin University over in the West, did a 4-year Bachelor of Science Physio degree with first class honours, and have since gone and gotten a graduate certificate in engineering, done much the same as you, Kane, sort of through work and stuff that you have to do, done some further physio and health qualifications, done a director's course that I'm just finishing up assignments now, and for all likelihood, with where everything is going, will likely end up be doing an MBA, but certainly will have a strong stance on not funding it myself, as probably the most overly educated person on this podcast, having interesting views about education.
Well, it's probably an important thing to note is we're all public school boys, all three of us. And as Matty coined earlier today, we're from the school of hard knocks. So yeah, mine was at near Knox actually. So I'm probably more accurate when we say Knox anyway. So there we go. Yeah, but I say for tonight, if we're going to if private school comes into the conversation, I will play devil's advocate, even though I'm probably not a huge advocate of private education on the whole. I'll be devil's advocate for this evening. I guess the starting point, I picked up some stats this afternoon when we flagged this as something we could discuss. And I started off with childcare just to see how many kids were in childcare. And it's over 1.25 million kids. So over 1.25 million kids are in childcare. It's basically 1 in every 3 kids are in some form of childcare. Private schools are very similar. Around 1 in 3 kids are in a Catholic or an independent school. And that's roughly split 50-50. So of that 1/3, there's about half of those in Catholic schools, half in independent schools. And the remaining 2/3 are in the government school system. 40% of Year 12 kids apply for further education, be it university or TAFE, and around 80% of those get accepted. The average HEC stat has been steadily increasing. And what do you think the average HEC stat is these days, guys?
Oh, as somebody who's very, as you know, Kane, frustratingly annoyed with my current one from a taxation point of view, I would say, I'd probably say about 25.
It's a pretty good guess. We'll do it the old Price is Right sort of methodology. Matthew McTighe will probably go 25,001 just by taking anything above.
Look, I'll take 32.
Well, you're both a little bit over. The current average HEC stat is just over $20,000. So, yeah, closer to 20 than 25. But Ryan, you're pretty close to the money there. There is
still a lot of money.
Yeah, there are 5%
of paper.
Yeah, exactly. And there's 5% of people who actually owe more than 50,000 as well.
Sorry, what at the current 2019 is the rate at which you start paying that back? Your taxable income needs to be at.
It's about 50,000. That's probably the best. Yeah.
Okay.
It's roundabout-ish that. So yeah, it's around 50,000. You start paying back around 4%. I think it is the lowest rate. Software calculates all these sort of things these days. So it's not something which most people need to calculate. But obviously, the more you earn, the more you pay back. So we'll get into HECS a little bit later. But they were just some stats to set the scene. So about 1/3 of kids are in childcare. 1/3 of kids are in a non-government school, and I'd say once you take out 80%, about 1/3 of kids go to university or TAFE as well. So what do we think, gents? Interesting
stats about the daycare. 1/3 of kids go to daycare. I thought that'd be probably a little bit higher, but I guess these days I guess daycare is really just building the fundamental social skills, isn't it, to get the kids ready for their primary school education. So, and learning through play, I guess. So I guess families with maybe, a couple of siblings potentially aren't sending their kids to daycare, but yeah, I thought that might be a little bit higher.
Yeah, so did I actually. I thought with more and more, couples or parents or just generally people having to work to fund everything, I actually thought that would be a bit higher.
Yeah, it's funny. You always think your situation's unique, and I know we've touched on this before, Ryan, and your partner TK mentioned that as much as you think your situation's unique, it's not unique. I always find when I discuss childcare with other people, and it's usually when I'm walking a little fella down the street at sort of 11 a.m. on a Tuesday, or some time where a kid would be in childcare, I'd be at work stereotypically. People go, when does he go to childcare? That's one of the first leading questions. Like, it's just an unusual question based on when we were younger, and I'd imagine the stats around childcare when we were all kids was significantly lower. But just it seemed, I agree, it seems like the childcare figure would be much higher than what that sort of indicates.
So as two, fathers who have children, what are you planning on doing schooling wise with the kids? Talking about education and making these decisions, and I've heard that it can be an absolute, obviously we're miles away from it, but I've heard that it can be a nightmare in terms of where you actually live can determine what schools you get into and all this other complex stuff that seems to be about with it. So what are you guys doing with your kidlets?
Yeah, and
We're probably...
Sorry, Matthew, you please take lead, my friend.
I was just going to say, yeah, I was just going to say, look, we're probably a step in time ahead of Kane, whereas he might still be determining what primary school his little guy's going to go to. But because we've got a 7-year-old in primary school already, the other two are just going to follow at the same school. So that's a given. So we're sort of focusing on high schools at the moment for Mia, who's 7. So while she's still a good 5 or 6 years away, we are starting to think about that. And, what we're going to send her to, we're hoping to send her to an all-girls school. So Kim came from an education of all girls up here in Brisbane. I was obviously down in Melbourne. So her hope is to get her to an all girls. And they generally start from, I think, grade 5 is when you can start sending them up here. I'm not too sure if it's the same down there, but yeah, that's the reason why we're looking at schools at the moment while she's only 7. So it's, yeah.
So all girls school, and I don't know anything about these sort of things. All girls school would generally mean, is that a private school? Is that a Catholic school? What does that mean? Or is there an all girls public school? Because there is one of those down here.
I believe there are all girls schools, public schools, but she will be going to a Catholic private school up here in Brisbane. So Kim, not the one that Kim went to. She, for whatever reasons, I think she thinks that school, and I won't name any names, but the education may have or dropped off a little bit since she went, and that's going on, 2000 she graduated, so that's nearly 20 odd years. But yeah, that's going to be a Catholic, hopefully, school. But I mean, we've got to get in there. That's the first step.
Yeah. Now, did her parents go to a private school as well, or was Kim the first of the family to go, like the first sort of generation to go to a private school?
Don't quote me, but I believe her dad. No, I don't think either of them did. So her grandma and grandpa on her dad's side were both born in Poland, so they came over here with pretty much nothing. So I think pretty much he would have had a public education, and her mum as well, I'm quite sure, was public as well. Yeah, so her and her siblings were the first in that line to go to private.
Yeah, and that's the other part of that as well. Like, I was having this discussion with my wife earlier today, and her mum went to a particular private school here, and then my wife went to that particular school. And I'm sure if my little fella had been born with different genitalia, he'd be probably going to that school as well. Albeit we've only relocated recently relocated geographically, so all our school stuff was kind of thrown up into the air. But yeah, she was also saying there's obviously people who were at that school who both their parents kind of slogged their guts out to be able to send their kids to to that particular private school or any private school, and the amount of work they needed to do as parents just to be able to, I guess, send a kid there where it might not in the end make any material difference to, I guess, your child's progress is just mind-boggling.
Yeah, I think that's the tough conundrum between. I mean, it's something that you always hear about. What's better, private, public? I was very fortunate in my last 2 years of school to go, even though I went to all public schools, to go to a year 11 and 12 only public school in Western Australia, which to me was just a phenomenal experience. Just having, I guess, just year 11 and 12 there, and the teachers could interact with you, a bit more like genuinely like a young adult, as if you were preparing to go into TAFE or uni or the workforce. So that was a really good experience. But I do wonder, like, besides, and a person that I spoke to ages ago about this summed up the difference. This was his very crude way of summing up the difference between public and private schools. And I don't know what you guys think of this, but he basically said he doesn't think educationally wise there's any difference, but he basically said the reason that you send your private kid to a private school is because they can be friends with other people who are sending their kids to a private school. And that, now we're here in Melbourne, so for those who don't know this person, fair enough, but he's a very famous person. But he's like, you can only have your friend become friends with Eddie Maguire's friend if you send them to a private school. And he basically said that the value of the private school was not when they're at the school, but the network that they walk out with and the people that they connect with. And that's can be like I said, it's his very crude way of saying the difference between the schools. But I always have wondered, what's the difference in the education between a public and private school, and what's taught and what's seen. And yeah, I don't know if you guys have any insights, but that's always my conundrum of whether we would ever send our kid to a private school, because personally not coming from them and having gone on and gotten a couple of university degrees and whatnot, I don't see the cost benefit analysis of it, I guess.
Yeah, I don't think just sending your child to a private school is going to guarantee that they progress more in the classroom. That's just not going to happen. It's only as good as, I guess, as much work as you as a parent would put into the kid as well. Like, it's all well and good just kind of palming off the kid to the best school that money can buy between 9 and 3:30. But if you're basically an absentee parent outside of that, then it's not going to make a lick of difference what school you send the kid to. They're not going to progress anyway because they don't have any, structure or maybe love outside of some monetary sort of thing thrown towards their education.
I think as well, look, I went to a Catholic school, so I'm not, private, public, I don't really care. This is probably more, Kim probably feels more strongly about this to where our kids go, but you can, I think, spot the difference between, in terms of maybe the values that the kids are taught. And I'll give you the example of, there's a great private school up here for boys, and whenever you see these boys, wherever they're out at Suncorp Stadium attending an event, or they're just out on the streets or at the Royal Show, doing what they do, they just look and they act in a certain way that they have respect, and they respect the school, they respect the community. You'll see them walking down the street, they are dressed immaculately, they respect the uniform, whereas you'll see the local public school down the road, T-shirts are hanging out, they'll be crossing the street, without, walking at the crosswalk. It's just a different mentality, I think. And I think that is, I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but I'm just thinking that is maybe one thing that you'll get from a private school education.
Yeah, it's around discipline and structure and those sort of things, I think, where the rules are a little bit more adhered to in that private school environment than at the public school. Like I didn't wear school shoes for 3 or 4 years. I just said that I had a sore ankle from soccer for the best part of 4 years. It was like the longest ankle rehab in the history of mankind. And no teacher batted an eyelid. I was just getting around in, I think, speeders or feelers or something for 3 or 4 years. Well, I don't think that would ever happen I probably wouldn't happen in a private school environment unless you had a note from your mum, and that would probably be triple checked against forgeries.
Yeah, forgeries.
Yeah, I suppose that's the difference that I hadn't noticed or picked up on, but obviously not something that I'm looking for. But yeah, it's a good observation that you made there, Matt.
And for all the people out there, the Royal Show in Brisbane is called the Ekka, is it not? again, just for the second time for this podcast?
That is correct, yes. The Royal Show is the Ekka, for reasons I'm not too sure of.
Has it got something to do with where it's held? I don't really know, but I don't know that much about.
It's held at the exhibition. It's held at the exhibition ground, so maybe there's something on that.
Yeah.
But I might just jump in with what Ryan said, speaking to the guy he knows who went to the private school and the connections. I think that does ring true, because as I said, I didn't go to a private school, but where I work, there's a couple of guys who went to private schools, and they've been out of them for 20 odd years, but the connections they make in that 7 or 8 years they're at the school, that they still have, 10, 15 years later, whether they were playing, rugby for the private school and they've made connections through there, or even with other schools they were playing against, they've kept those connections, and they're using them later in life in the different degrees or the different places of work they're in.
Yeah, 100%. It's just that they have a better alumni sort of ordeal. You go and watch the old boys play football, or, somebody play, whatever sport is the sport of choice of that particular school, or you're in the debating club or something like that. You have a connection where you don't have in the public school environment. I mean, we didn't even have a formal 10-year reunion or just gone 20-year reunion. We just, basically at the end of VC, you get, pat on the head or a kick in the bum, and we'll see you later. But I remember when I started as an accountant, sitting around the boardroom table one Friday night when we could sit around and have a few drinks after the long week. And we just got talking about education, and we went around the table, and there would have been probably 15 accountants around the table. And there was only me and one other out of the 15 who were from public schools. Everyone else had come from a private school environment. So I think that networking thing, in the way that there's all different interconnections between the one school and between schools, I think, both of you really nailed that on the head there. That network is important, probably more important than the actual education component offered by a private school.
Yeah, and whether, as a person from public school and actually a bit of an advocate for it, but whether rightly or wrongly, the world still does operate with it is who you know, not what you know, in more cases than not. And I think it is something, and I suppose to your point, Matt, like, I've worked quite hard to be in the positions and fortunate positions that I do get now. And I was in an event last week. There was a very like invite only type sort of fancy dancy event, and walked in there, and a guy that I play hockey with was there, and he was there by virtue of his friend, who, exactly what you said, they 15 years ago, still talking about their private school, like high school ski trips, and have done various business pieces together and sort of helped each other, I suppose, move through that latter environment. So, like I said, and rightly or wrongly, for some reasons, unfortunately, that is how the world can work, and it's definitely an advantage, I think, to going to a private school.
Yeah, so I think we all agree that the network component is important. That's an important, potentially an important difference between private schools and public schools. The education should be broadly the same, obviously, depending on different weightings for different particular subjects. Extracurricular activities is probably there's probably more on offer in the private school environment than you have in a public school environment. And I know private schools who've got their own pool. We used to have to go to the public school and it'd be closed off for maybe an afternoon, and 100 kids would just jump in and just party on afterwards. So it's a different sort of environment, but the education component should broadly be the same.
And I mean, the example tonight showing that none of us did go to private school, but I mean, look how successful you boys are in your own right. And I can guarantee that, whilst having a good education is you can't undervalue that, but it's what you learn as well by the people you're surrounded by when you're growing up. So both of you have touched on in previous episodes how hardworking your parents were, which has obviously rubbed off on both of you. You didn't need to go to a private school to get where you are, because you've had that hardworking sort of ethic ingrained in you from a young age, I think.
Yeah, I think that again links back to that parent comment earlier. It doesn't make any difference if you spend whatever you want to spend to send your kid to the best school that money can buy. If you're not there to actively parent or actively listen to your child, then all the money in the world isn't going to fix the problems you're going to kind of build up in your kid. Or they could. It'd be a lot of therapy.
Very expensive therapy, but I think you're right there with schooling. If you're, as a parent, absolutely killing yourself to get your kid into this school or that school or whatnot, I think you spending the time with them will be more valuable than them going to that school. But what about post school education? Post school, when being a parent, you probably, as a late teenager, shy away from staying around with your parents. If you're a bit like me, you get out of home reasonably quickly, by virtue of independence, not by virtue of being forced out or anything. But yeah, what do you guys think on education following the world of school?
Well, I almost opted out of that. I almost went and did a trade. I didn't. I went to university. Does it matter? Maybe. I think it's a bit of a piece of paper. You don't use any of it. Then you get to a job and you go, wow, I did 4 years at university. I don't know a thing about what I'm doing. Some sort of practical component of maybe, you do that in year 10 where you could do some work experience for a couple of years. And we've discussed that before, how I definitely didn't go down the physio path after doing some sort of flotational physio with some older ladies.
Aged care people.
Yeah, that's right. So I think actually experiencing what you want to do is way more important than committing 4 years to something which you have no idea what if it's going to suit you, and also racking up like an average 20 sort of grand HECS debt at least.
Yeah, as somebody who does have a variety of pieces of paper from higher education facilities, I struggle with them. I have a very much love-hate relationship with them, because I do teach at a university and that as well. And I think some courses are really valuable. Like definitely, if I'm going in for surgery, I want to know that surgeon's gone and gotten a medical degree and spent, another 10 years becoming a surgeon and all that kind of thing. But for a lot of other things, especially these days, where we say that HECS debt's 20 odd K, I see that tripling in the next decade, because knowing how much degrees cost now, like I started my degree in 2009 and sort of know how much that costs. And I thought it was an obscene amount of money then. If I was to do that degree now, actually teaching into the course, it's more than double what it would cost. And I'm already pretty fed up with my HECS debt, let alone thinking of something double that. So I think if I was to have my time again, I'm very grateful that I did university 10 years ago, not now. 2, as I said, with my work and the stuff that I'm probably where everything goes, I think by virtue at some point I'm going to have to do an MBA. But if you asked me 5 years ago, before I kind of went into the world of School of Hard Knocks and the actual real world where you learn things, I would have been like, yeah, I'll go and do an MBA and HECS that, and I reckon that'll be really beneficial for my career. My stance on it now is I will do it when I absolutely necessarily have to and can find the most financially smart way to fund it without personally taking out a massive HECS debt. And I suppose that's because you look at, I guess maybe it is the whole millennial generation thing, but we are the most overqualified, underemployed generation in history. I mean, now you need a management diploma or something to probably work at McDonald's, because the last 10 years, higher education has just gone through this boom. And the amount of people that I know that have master's degrees and are struggling to get a graduate entry job, and master's degrees, we're talking a lot more than $20,000 worth of HECS debt, is staggering. So I'm probably questioning the value of a higher education, unless it is a profession degree, or unless you sort of know that it's going to get you to where you want to do. But the thought of, I suppose, the long-winded point I'm trying to make, the thought of going, I will get a degree and then I will get a job in my chosen field doing what I want, is becoming harder and harder and a whole lot more expensive. I think there's a lot more value in getting some form of a job and doing a degree part-time, or doing it whilst gaining real-world experience. That's sort of my take on it,
Yeah,
as someone who has more than one degree.
yeah, I think the issue there is like it's the education system and the different things that people are studying now. Why are you kind of learning things out of a book? We're not teaching skills anymore. And to quote or paraphrase Napoleon Dynamite, chick stick guys have got good skills, nunchuck skills, sweet bike jumping skills. But I read something out of Seth Godin's blog from yesterday, which when we started talking about education, this basically sums it up perfectly as far as I can tell about what people should really focus on. And I'll read this verbatim from Seth Godin's blog from yesterday. Words that matter: discipline, rigor, patience, self-control, dignity, respect, knowledge, curiosity, wisdom, ethics, honor, empathy, resilience, honesty, long-term possibility, bravery, kindness, and awareness. All these are skills, soft skills, learnable skills. But if they're skills, that means that they're decisions, a choice we get to make, even if it's not easy or satisfying in the long term. These skills are in short supply sometimes, which makes them even more valuable. They're not skills you learn in school on the whole. They should be, but they're not skills which you're taught in the classroom as much as you maybe should be. And I think we probably all were in some form when we were younger, when it wasn't so geared around getting the right NAPLAN result.
That's right. We were taught those skills, growing up. And I'll just give a quick example. So my wife has a bit of a business on the side, selling sunshades, and she needed some marketing done. So she contacted a university some way, and just reached out to a marketing graduate or a student. Hey, do you want some some work? Obviously, I'll pay you. A great opportunity for you to be working for a company and use your what you've been learning. And she worked for a little bit, but came up with excuse after excuse of why she couldn't rock up to work. So one of them was a friend's going away party. Another one was just she was tired, couldn't come in someday. So I think the kids going through the education system, and I don't speak for everybody here because I'm not in the education system at the moment, but maybe there's a bit of a disconnect to when we were growing up, and those things that you all mentioned there, Kane, we learned at a young age, whereas maybe the generation these at the moment aren't learning those soft skills.
I also learned a truckload about dinosaurs.
I think one of the struggles with the education system now is I do think it is being moved far more towards a business model rather than a teaching model. And in a business model, I can tell you that it is very hard to fail somebody at university. Very, very tough today to fail somebody because it's not smart business. You want them to progress, pay for the next courses, get the piece of paper, etc., etc. So I know that is becoming more and more of a challenge, talking to people that teach in that space. But going back to those skills and I guess the value of education, I think for me, higher education can sometimes be sold as this dream that is your automatic entitlement into the job or the profession, whatever it happens to be, without seeing it as it's a knowledge base to build skills around. And I look at stuff that you do, man, and I just think it's fantastic. The fact that you guys are renovating a house, the fact that you seem to tweak. I mean, from an outsider's view, you seem to have this whole 3-kid fatherhood, work management, father management thing down packed. And I sort of look at that and just go, that's to be renovating houses and actually have time with your kids, and that's highly successful as an outcome from what I see. And I don't think, like you said, you can shortcut any of those soft skills than actually just teaching people to do stuff, or that old adjunct of just getting on the tools and trying something.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. It all comes back to learning the right skills. It doesn't really matter what environment you learn the right skills in. It is the fact that you get the right skills from somewhere. It doesn't matter if it's private school, public school, childcare, non-childcare. university, TAFE. It's just about acquiring different skills on your journey through life. Doesn't matter the environment you learn them. That about wraps it up for this week on Daddy Eats Last. Do remember to subscribe to Daddy Eats Last on iTunes if you haven't already. And while you're there, please leave a review. Also, tell your mates about the podcast, especially if they're guys. Most of all, thanks for listening. And we'll be back next week for another episode, or should I say class, of Daddy Eats Last. How's that for a dad joke? Catch you next week in class.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.